Who can expand it? A test. Out of the box, network developers. So,
Wait, you've got redundancy.
yeah. So, yeah, anyway, welcome in spite of our acronym. So, some of you were at the hands-on lab in the morning, in the afternoon. And now we'll start with the industry panel, and then it will be followed by the lightning talks. So for those who don't know me, I'm Sujata Tibrewala. I'm Community Development Manager for Networking. I work for Intel. My work is to help the developer community outside of Intel to do the work in SDN and NFV. The part of what I do is these trainings. So 2017 in numbers, last year we did developer trainings and 11 meetups, 2 summits, 3 dev labs like this, 1 worldwide virtual conference. And we have Intel software innovators who are outside of Intel who work in the area of SDN and NFV who also train developers. One of them is here today, Shivram. He'll be presenting a lightning talk. Thank you. As part of what we do, we have something called Intel Developer Zone, which is software.intel.com/networking. We have tons of articles that you can go and look at. A lot of the hands-on trainings that you saw today, we convert them into articles, into video tutorials. So if you missed our hands-on trainings in the past, you can access them. And then, of course, we have these live trainings because you're here, right? You know about them. And like I said, we have Intel software innovators. So if you're working on something and you need our support, please reach me. There are like a lot of good facilities that we can give you: hardware access, engineering support, and ability to present at these meetups or events. So these are our focus for our meetups. We do 1 meetup every month. I'll not dwell on that. We can post this later. You can look it up, and we would love to hear from you. Proposed topics. Some of the things which are coming up in February, we have a MEC and network sizing meetup. We have a DPDK Summit, Bangalore, on March 9th. If you have an idea, call for proposals is still open. We have a DPDK hands-on training happening the next day after the DPDK Summit. Packet processing meetup on March. The agenda is still getting finalized, so again, ideas welcome. Open Daylight meetup in London, April. Date not yet finalized. So with that, let's move on to our panel. So thank you, Lakshmi and Robert, to agree to be on our panel. Sanjit Gang is getting delayed, so he will be there in a bit. So Lakshmi Sharma is Director of Product Management at Google. Robert Stormer is Founder CTO of Cumulus Network. Sanjeev Gang is Investment Director at Intel Capital. Hopefully be there soon. So we'll start the panel with the introductions from the panelists. So for the introduction, I would like for you to also, elaborate on your personal journey. This is a meetup for the developers, for the engineers here. So we would like to know about your personal journey, where you started, and where you are right now, and what are the lessons for you from that they can,
I'm Lakshmi Sharma. I'm currently I'm head of product management, cloud networking and networking services at Google. This is my third week there. So I'll talk about what I've done before. So I started my career as an engineer, network engineer. When I say network, writing to network processors. Stayed with a small company for a couple of years, and then kept doing a lot of take IPsec draft, pick up like L2TP v3 or L2TP draft, did a lot of programming, and in due course found mentors, not that I was looking for mentors, but found people who kept finding my strengths and then kept putting me into places where I could best deliver. And to be honest, if it wasn't for the right set of people in my early stage of early life and working life, I don't think I would have a vision of where I could be, because I come from a very different background where I'm the first girl ever to go to a college from my family, although I come from a very good business family. So that was very important to me, and they kept motivating me. And then I every time I picked up a role, I picked up the leader, even if it required me to take a hit with my title or composition. Because I learned so much by having a good leader or mentor, and then I continue to do the same thing. When I see people who have potential, I just look for them. And I love technology, and then those qualities that I find in my leaders, I try to just portray in myself. Small company, went to Cisco, joined a team which has just been acquired, and then they were looking at what to do. So it became ASR 1K, CSR 1KV, and then joined Juniper, started internal SDN team, led the engineering team for packet core. So kept not intentionally, but it's just because I followed certain leaders and certain practices. I kept working with people, and then for past 6 years, it has been a lot of SDN and a lot of cloud. I ran a startup called Rift.io, where we did NFV cloud platform for Cisco. That's where I met Robert. And Cisco was going through this transition from a box company to a hardware agnostic, software as a service or networking as a service. So that's where I was at Cisco. I was running engineering team for network function virtualization group. Started cloud networking solutions with some really smart leaders. Did startup. Then I went to Brocade, led their software-defined networking product management team. I've done so much, and I thought NFV, VNF, all these things were growing so much. A lot of open sourcing. Open sourcing kind of drove that. ODL, OPNFV, then OpenStack. A lot of things that Cisco did, and I was part of it, and then Robert was also part of some. So we that power of developer, and then that has really, I would say, upped the game in networking. A lot of people 5-6 years ago, to be honest, Cisco, Juniper, Ericsson, Brocade, these are all kind of old companies. They're doing old things, and networking is no more cool. Thanks to Nicira, thanks to ONS, thanks to OPNFV, and thanks to software, and thanks to companies like Intel and AMD who were doing innovation in CPUs and NICs, and then while people kept thinking that, hey, networking could never be cool. So I just kind of stayed, at that side, and after doing a lot of that, I was like, hey, I want to see how IT is transforming, because every time you talk about cloud, you just talk about ITs. So that's where I took the job at Target. It was, Vice President for Infrastructure Cloud Compute, migrating services, how to make decisions about IoT. Do you introduce robot or not introduce that? That was fantastic. But to be honest, I just followed good leadership, and where transformation was happening, I didn't worry. As I said, where would I land? But my vision has always been to work with great leaders, follow the right technology, and then you'll just end up being there. And then I'm really, really, I believe in the power of this software development networking. To be honest, I feel the biggest kick that happened to my career was when SDN started, 6-7 years ago, when the word SDN was coined. That really has enabled clouds and enabled the ecosystem of a lot of companies which are coming. Every single company that you see, ML, AI, all of that, it's really APIs, and it's really software, and it's really software-driven intelligence, software-driven networking, all of that. So best place to be is, and then Intel has, but not just because she's sitting here, but I do believe I worked a lot with Intel in almost all my companies. So yeah, work together, build the ecosystem. I think every single big company or small company has become one company now because of the developer eco-friendly system.
So I'm Robert Starmer, I'm founder of Kunos Technologies. We're a technology consultancy, so we help people migrate their services in the cloud. I actually was a long time Cisco. That was sort of my big growth in the industry in general, and it's kind of weird to think that a cloud resource comes out of a company like Cisco. But I mean, Lakshmi and I think are both proof that that can happen. But the reality is that even when I started at Cisco, which was almost 20 years ago now, I started focusing on the applications. I worked in the load balancing group, I worked in the caching group. These are all technologies that people don't necessarily think of as networking technologies, and yet at the time, it was a networking company that was working on and looking at these particular technologies to help accelerate applications. But it's always been this interaction between applications and their use of the network. And if we fast forward to today, the areas that are really interesting to me are not necessarily the classic NFV or SDN functions, but it's tools like Istio, service mesh type capabilities. These are, again, proxies, load balancers, scale components, and where they're being placed and run on computers. But in reality, they are network functions. They are things that are accelerating our environment because of the network. And again, to me, that's where these two pieces really start to fit and to mesh. My career path that drove me to this particular position was always trying to help people find how these new technologies enabled their business, right? Because I was always sort of working on some of these more bleeding edge components, even with many years at just one big company. And finally, it was like, the company's too big. I can't help at a mega scale company helping other mega scale companies do this. We have to find the smaller companies that are able to be more agile in their thought process, in their development process. And that's what's led me to doing what I do today, helping people make these transitions and migrations.
I'll just quickly make a comment. So did you know that Istio team is something which is also part of my work now?
Oh, no.
Yeah, see, that's the power of application and then open source and developer framework,
Yeah.
We are connected again.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I'll just make a comment. All three have been ex-Cisco.
Yeah.
I have worked for Cisco also. And it's kind of funny, everyone you meet in networking, they have either worked at Cisco or Juniper.
Let's ask here, right? I don't want to. A lot of people ask. Because, okay, how many Cisco, ex-Cisco? Okay, yeah, 40%. How many ex-Juniper? Okay, 1%, 1.4%. How many ex-Brocade? Okay, Brocade? Oh, okay. How many ex-Ericsson? Okay. I just worked for 2 months because the company I was helping with is a container security networking company that got acquired by Ericsson. So I happened to work there too.
Yeah, I worked at Ericsson too when I was consulting for Wipro for 3 months.
I worked with people from Ericsson.
Okay, let's get back. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So, in your introduction, one of the things which stood out for me that you said you met a lot of people who realized or looked at your potential and they kind of encouraged it. In my experience, what I've seen, in offices, maybe people tend to also look at maybe negative, right? Where they don't have a good working relationship with someone. So was it like you ignored those? I'm sure you must have had share of those as well.
So I mentor a couple of people. I was just talking to one of them who's not part of my company before this session. So yeah, I think one of the things that if you have focus, just stay focused on the dream that you want to achieve. This could be philosophical, but I grew up in a culture where they just talk about, if you're focused on the eye of a fish, then you just stay focused. And there will be people who will come in your way, but then you have to collect your strengths and the people who are there to support you. Because even if you're one person and that person, you can just work with that person and then build that set of people who are like you, right? So then build that ecosystem of people who will support each other, right? Keep doing it, and then you will end up building that such a huge network of people who will support each other that you're not, you would worry about, there would be things, but so I'll give one of the SVPs at Cisco is still at Cisco. So in my second time, we were doing the cloud work, and then I was given this huge charter, okay, build this thing which is called Virtual Managed Services Cloud VPN, and we need people from all across Cisco, like wow. And then I had no people, and then first you have to get the product, get it going to the customer. So I go to this, to this person, and then he was my SVP even before, first time at Cisco. So I asked him, I said, I'm worried because there's so much money and I'm given so much budget, but I'm not sure, what if people will come in my way? Will I be successful? Because building cloud-based services for Cisco is huge, and Cisco is a hardware company, and I have to do something which is software agnostic. And then these are the people who were my managers and mentors at some point. So one thing which he said that the companies which are successful, the reason that they're successful is that when the company decides to move in a direction like Cisco, then everybody just automatically comes along. That's the reason they're successful. So he said, nobody will come in your way when you're doing an execution. And then if you're just focused on execution, I promise Lakshmi, nobody will come in your way. And it actually happened. Until we get to the end, things happen afterwards. Nobody really came. So I think that's the power of execution. Just genuinely, like when you're given a charter, believe in your charter, make your team believe into that charter, and you just keep moving. And I believe that people would not come in your way until you get to the finish line. Hello.
I really apologize for all the delays. I cannot blame it on weather and stuff, but it's actually my fault. Can you hear me or not?
Just want to switch on the bottom.
Better? All right, okay. I really apologize for the delay, but I'm happy to stay over if anybody has questions or any discussions to do.
Yeah, so we actually did our introductions. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so like you see, my name is Sanjeev Dan, Investment Director, Intel Capital. For those, how many people are familiar with Intel Capital? Okay, only a few. So I'm happy to give a quick primer on Intel Capital. So we are the venture capital arm of Intel, as the name indicates. We invest roughly $400 to $500 million every year in startups, primarily I would say in the US, but we are pretty global investors in general. We invest in Europe, we invest in Asia, Latin America, Japan, everywhere. We really look for a mix of strategic returns as well as financial returns. Financial returns are very similar to if you have a startup, you pitch to any investor, any VC, they will look for how you grow, how does the company grow financially, what markets are you selling into, and how does that grow. So those metrics are very similar for us as well. But in addition to that, we look for strategic returns. So we work together with Intel business units. Sujata is a close partner and others. So we look for companies that are able to bring strategic value to Intel as well, whether it is to help develop the ecosystem around Intel products, whether it is to plug in a gap in Intel's roadmap, or it is to accelerate what Intel is doing internally. So we look for a variety of things. I would say 80% of the companies we invest into are software companies. I think back in the day, Intel Capital was kicked off 26 plus years ago. And back in the day, Andy Grove realized that, hey, we can't be a successful hardware company if we only do hardware. And so he said, he started realizing the importance of software, and that's when he said, well, we have to start forming alliances with developers like all of you and start investing in the external ecosystem as well. So that's why we exist as a firm. And like I mentioned, we invest around $400 to $500 million every year. That makes us probably among the top 2 or top 3 venture capitalist firms in the world. Because if you take a venture capital firm, they have a fund, even if the big ones have $2 billion fund, that's over 7 to 10 years. So, for those of you who are familiar with the startup/venture capital world, most startups struggle to find a lead investor. Lead investor is the one, if you have a startup, you go to him or her and you say, hey, I want you to lead, and they will do most of the diligence. They will put the term sheet, they will set your pricing, valuation and everything. Lot of the VC firms do not lead by design. They want somebody else to lead and they will follow or participate in your round. We actually do the opposite. We lead most of the rounds we invest into. We lead, I would say, 70% of the deals we do. 30% of the times we are participating. Examples of companies, just to give you a more perspective on the type of companies we invest into. There's a company I did called Body Labs out of New York. It finally got acquired by Amazon 3 months ago. This was a company that I invested into at Series A stage. We led their Series A round 2 years ago. And the company is a computer vision engine for 3D body modeling. Initially, it started with relying on 3D camera. This is a software only company, but it relied on having a 3D camera. But then over time, the technology evolved so much that they didn't even need the 3D camera, so they could do it with the regular 2D camera like in your smartphone. And you guys are all familiar with Amazon Echo, but now Amazon is putting camera in Amazon Echo called Echo Look. So imagine Echo with a camera in your room. I understand it's creepy to some people, but that's what Amazon is trying to do. They're always pushing the boundaries, right? But so anyways, they built the hardware, and then they needed a software engine. So this company is going to become that computer vision engine and scale to every Look device in the next 1 or 2 years. Another company we invested in, TrueFit, which helps solve fitting problem, purely data-based company. It doesn't ask you to do measurements or scan yourself. It just asks you a simple question: which shirt from your closet fits you the best? And the way they suggest, they know, okay, based on your answer, the shirt you're looking at on Macy's.com will not fit you. There is a better fit. And the way they know it is because they have gone to the brands and mapped out all SKUs, all the apparel and shoes SKUs out there, data of all of that, and then they can tell, all right, if this shirt fits you, the one you're looking at will not fit you because I have the data of both the shirts. So it's a very data-intensive problem, and it's probably one of the very few companies that have solved this problem for online shopping. I hope this gives you a perspective of the type of companies we invest into, and I'm happy to chat more if needed.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for that introduction.
Can I just market too? Intel Capital's marketing. So I ran a startup called Rift.io, which was funded by Intel Capital. One of the
Absolutely.
yeah. So I was in Burlington for 11 months, and then there were a lot of customers that we got. Most of the leads that we got were because of Intel Development Forum and all. So we will go to all sort of places. We could start our open source group called Open Source Mano. With the support and the help that we got from the Intel Capital and the associated kind of connections we got. So I've
Glad
used
to
it.
hear. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for mentioning.
Yeah, these stories about the company, the app can suggest you what is a better fit for your dress and things like that. That's like so much more interesting than what we do in networking. But
That wouldn't happen unless you put that e-commerce site into some cloud
Yes,
connected
yes.
to network.
yeah, no, we're the plumbing below all of that, right?
Yeah,
Nothing
you need to
will happen.
accelerate the communications. I mean, come on, we need the network for that.
Yeah. So at one point, I'll just say this. One point, my daughter asked me, what do you do? So I used to work at Cisco at the time, and I said, you won't understand it. I write software for the router and switches. That thing which sits in our house, which helps you, view videos through your phone. It's boring. I was like, what? No. It helps me see the YouTube videos. How can you say it's boring?
But jokes apart, and to that point, since Intel is a very pervasive organization, it has data center group, so like networking, compute, storage. Similarly, it has client-facing group, and it has new technologies, new areas like IoT, etc. coming up, and hence Intel Capital actually invests into a variety of areas. So examples I mentioned are some of the deals that I did. But overall, from an Intel Capital perspective, we invested in networking. Software-defined networking has been a key focus area. Big data, we invested in Cloudera. I was lucky to be part of that deal. We invested in Cloudera. This is in the Hadoop space. So we invest at both infrastructure level as well as at the application level. Rift.io is a very good example, actually, of a company at an infrastructure level.
Yeah, so that's a really good segue to, go into from commercial to the open source space, right? And you also mentioned that from Rift.io, you went to like Mano and you spawned the open source project.
Loud? Not very loud.
You kind of mute it because it's
Better? Yeah, so I just wanted your comments on the business of open source, or how does it make business sense?
No, I think that's actually very easy. Many companies at least that I work with have real trouble finding a technology, understanding how that technology is going to help them improve their business, and then sort of being willing to pay for that up front. Open source shifts that equation because often the initial investigations, even the initial test deployments can all be done in a very straightforward fashion. Often there's a developer or an infrastructure manager that has said, hey, this is such an important piece of technology, I can just start to implement it right off the bat. I don't have to get any approvals to start leveraging these new capabilities. And we see that, I think, to a dramatic extent in the sort of the software as a service space now, where people are able to build tools that they wouldn't have even had a chance to start to pull together because the costs of software used to be so detrimental to that acceleration. At the same time, open source does not answer all questions. When you start talking to companies that are of a certain scale, at least, one of the first questions that comes up is, as you're talking about open projects as a way of enabling a particular capability, is how do I support this? How do I, with my team of developers that are trying to build my technology, not that particular capability, how do I support this thing? So how do I get somebody else to help me with that? So suddenly you need that enterprise support capability on top of what was otherwise an open, very flexible platform, right? And we saw that in the OpenStack community, where people would build OpenStack, but if they didn't have a way of then hiring a company to help them support it, they had to build a much larger team to try to support that piece of open source technology, and usually that failed, right? It's the companies that were able to find that right support model plus open technology that I think really found success.
So basically you're talking about like Linux, Red Hat kind of combination.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good analogy.
Right.
Yeah, I'll take I'll take an example from from three places, like Google being a cloud provider, or Target, which is an application developer, and then the previous example, offering cloud platforms and infrastructure. So one thing which has happened, right? So all the networking and networking services innovation that we talked about, like application load balancers, DNSs, and DPIs and AVCs and all, means that all that took almost 30, 50 years to be built and go back to internet innovation. Like think about 40, 50 years, and then 6, 7 years ago, then you suddenly see and 2012 NFV paper comes in, then SDN gets defined, then SD-WAN. How would you scale to that, right? You cannot scale to that without the power of open source. You need to bring a huge community, set of people who are all over the world, who are just willing to code. And then there is so much talent out there which was not there, many years ago. So open sourcing to me has enabled that set of people who come from very diverse backgrounds and all of them working on different problems at the same time around the same code base. So then it allows a company like, let's say, Target, and or say a company like service providers who were seen as hey, they're the slowest people, Comcast and AT&T, but look at how much innovation they have done. Software defined, yeah, people kind of bash OpenStack, but a lot of clouds are running on OpenStack, VNFs are running on OpenStack. So if you're into that business, Like, you do want the power of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people working towards the code and bringing new feature set. And then going back to his point that then you will take that code and make it performant for your infrastructure. If you're a data center, then you will just use your enterprise application, evolve that. If you're a service provider, you will pick up a VNF or NFV, and then you will just evolve on the performance and the scalability around it. But if it was not for those hundreds of thousands of people who work in those open source communities, many of them, whether it is Golang, like Istio, Kubernetes, OpenStack, the kind of value and the knowledge that has come in because of the open sourcing, I think it's tremendous. And that's the reason we are able to, so many companies have been able to make so much progress. And just taking the recent example of TensorFlow, look at the number of companies which are doing AIs and all that work based on these deep minds and the machine learning and AI APIs that exist, because it's right there for you to build your company upon, right? So that's what I believe. Like, it's really enabled all of us to go and accelerate innovation at various levels in almost every vertical and horizontal you can imagine.
Yeah, thank you. So you're basically talking about like companies working as a community and contributing towards a common goal and then taking the results and maybe customizing to their own needs.
I totally agree with those comments, and I think Intel as a company has thrived very well with adoption of open source, and Intel obviously helps drive some of it as well. From an Intel Capital perspective, we invest in open source companies all the times. We do look for some critical mass of developer adoption before we start getting into it. I think I talked about Cloudera, which is a Hadoop company that's Hadoop is all open source, and Cloudera has its own distribution of Hadoop, but it's a fork from open source version of Hadoop. And similarly, we invested in Mirantis, if you guys are familiar with that. It's an OpenStack based company, again another open source company. So we invest in open source companies all the times, and the thing we look for really is how does the contribution of this company and the developer ecosystem to their distribution help give them differentiation over time, because a lot of the open source companies they start with giving out the core for free, and then they start charging for features around it. For example, security or manageability features, enterprise grade features, and that's when the business model starts to evolve. Otherwise it becomes a services company, purely services company, which is hard to scale or hard to monetize and get a good valuation on. So those are some of the things that we look for when we invest in open source companies.
So services based on open source, right?
Well, I think the comment you made about community is interesting, right? That without a community, it's you don't really have an open source project. You have something that's open source code, right? But once you have a community, you actually have a project. You have people that are able to contribute, or at least start to consume, and then adjust the technology to fit real needs. And that then drives that open technology into something that, as you said, you might find specific extensions that are enterprise extensions, and it becomes an open source product company. Or maybe you don't find that, and you find that it really is more of a services organization that needs to be built. I've seen and worked with both of those sorts of organizations.
So we're almost like halfway into the time of the panel. I would like to open the floor for audience questions here. Any questions from the audience?
One of the questions that I have is that you guys have been in the SDN world for quite some time. What's your take on the real deployment? And what are the challenges if some, say for example, a startup is here which is doing SDN? One of the challenges that I have, at least I know of, is that when you go and talk to IT, many of them may not really know much about it, or they don't care. What's your take from the inside point of view in terms of what is it that you guys have seen?
Well, I can say I've seen two views. One is SDN as the end purpose. If you're in a networking company, and I worked, like I said, in a couple of networking companies for a while, often the goal was to sell somebody on SDN as the answer. And that's I find kind of backwards, because the real issue is, what's the application? What's the application need? If you're a service provider, having software definable and software manageable networks, whether they be classic, hardware-based networks that have software extensions that make it easier to manage, or actually build proper overlay modeled SDN networks, the need is the flexibility, the fungibility, the self-service capabilities and extensions that SDN provides. In enterprises, it's the same thing. Deploying an SDN within an enterprise may not make sense for its own right, just to say, well, now I have SDN. Right? If I've deployed one and it's wonderful, my network admins like it because it's more flexible, but that didn't necessarily provide any business value. So if there's a business driver, service providers have sort of obvious business need for it. Enterprises, depending on what they're trying to do, may not have as much of a need. I look at OpenStack as an example of a consumer of SDN. So OpenStack was the application that wanted to leverage SDN because it allowed for API-driven network capabilities. Right? What was the actual driver was OpenStack making this easy, and yet we looked at the very complex, highly capable SDN systems that people were trying to integrate in, and most of them never got used. They got used in service provider environments, again, where it really made sense to have that kind of flexibility and some of the capabilities that those systems provided. But when you actually started looking at smaller enterprises, the complexity of the high-end SDN services didn't meet the business need. Right? The simple SDN that was embedded in OpenStack, the simplest functions of Neutron as a software-defined network engine were adequate. Right? And it was really interesting to see, some people really struggle with the SDN aspect of an environment. Beneficial as it could be, it didn't provide business value for that particular use case. So to me, that was the big question. What's the business value that SDN will derive? If there's business value that we can show, then absolutely it makes sense to go through the learning curve of using SDN and the enablement of allowing that software-defined network to really provide some value.
So I'll add to that, and I completely agree, right? So SDN, on IT side, SDN is what does it mean? Okay, it's software-defined networking. But what do I really use it for? Segmentation and, isolation. And, that I can achieve with VLAN. I write, some Java code, Python code, I already achieve it. And I put it on top of VMware, I put it on top of OpenStack. So fully agree, right? So a lot of ITs believe that they're already doing it because there were some players who were offering that kind of segmentation, in their data centers, and then their newer applications don't really fit the mantra of that cross vendor, cross server kind of SDN philosophy. So the goal is is your application, but some larger enterprises where they do own their WAN, and in certain cases they want to bring in the managed services from third parties back to their to the data centers. That's happening a lot too, because they don't want to be paying money to the managed network providers, not service providers. So in those cases, SDN makes a lot of sense to them. But for smaller companies with 2-3 data centers, if they've already deployed data center design, or if they have one of those names who had been offering them network segmentation, absolutely agree with you. They do not understand, or they do not want to, they do not like the newer definition, because they all believe that VLAN and VXLANs have been serving that purpose for them.
So when you talk about business proposition of SDN, you work for Google, right? Google is an excellent example of someone who's using it in their own network, right? On their own.
So that goes back to the big size IT, right? So any big size IT, they would, there are a lot of examples like service provider ITs, right? AT&T's data center, or Deutsche Telekom's data center, Telefonica's cloud and data center, all of their ITs, they do use Comcast IT, right? All of these big vendors with their big IT infrastructure, it absolutely makes sense for them to do it. You don't want to be putting in big 3-tier architecture or clause fabric, because it's just too expensive. And then it's not as agile as you want it to be. The whole idea of SDN was that you can deliver services faster, right? So the traditional models don't allow you to do that. So that's why it's worth investing into that, if you have hundreds of thousands of applications and users, but you have relatively less number of applications, you're talking about 100, maybe 1,000 or 2,000. I don't think it will make a lot of sense to introduce SDN solutions, like the SDN solutions that we know of.
Yeah, I think the interesting sort of tipping point for me is whether or not your development, your internal application consumption models, whether it's internal apps or as Lakshmi was saying, and I might be looking at trying to use more software as a service type resources. Do I have to tie into those services to provide my security channel through VPN? Do I need to automate that? If I'm tying into a third-party system, maybe it's a hybrid cloud platform or infrastructure services that I need to automatically connect to, and I actually want dynamic capabilities. Why am I using a hybrid cloud if I don't want something dynamic out of it, right? I want to be able to connect to wherever those services and resources exist. Suddenly my network isn't just a simple segmented service that, oh, VXLAN takes care of that or VLAN takes care of that. I need to establish that end-to-end connection dynamically. Now the software definition of that network becomes valuable, so SDN as a tool enables me to change how I'm doing my business. But again, it's being driven by the applications that I want to deploy or how I want to go and change how I'm deploying my applications. Those are the business needs that make SDN a really valuable technology. Right? I think for the first couple years, the buzz was just SDN is the new thing. I have to have that. I don't even know what it is. I don't even understand the definition. I have to have that in my network for whatever reason. But I think we're now getting more, effectively, we're seeing more coherence in the business needs, things like dynamic applications, hybrid use cases for cloud resources, be they SaaS applications or infrastructure services in a hybrid model, where you need that VPN session, you need that segment, whatever that segment technology is, you need that segment to be dynamically created and deleted when you're done with that service.
So you're talking about like network segmentation, network slicing.
Network policy, segmentation, services. Maybe you're actually using. Istio is kind of an interesting one. So this whole concept of a service mesh. It's effectively a centralized proxy in some ways of thinking about it, or a distributed centralized proxy, which is a hard way of thinking of it. But those technologies are things that could potentially span sites. But that means that you still have to be able to create that connection. What is that secure connection, that path that you would let your traffic, your business go over? Right? How do you enable that? Well, again, software automation is what we think of to do that, and what does the network then enable? Well, I have to have a software-enabled network to be able to make use of some of these technologies.
Yeah, thank you. So do you want to kind of, somebody.
I think you guys captured most of it. I think the only thing I would add is if you want to start looking at, I don't want to say successful examples really, but there have been acquisitions that Cisco has made recently in the SDN space. We knew some of those companies pretty well, pretty intimately actually. So I won't, despite the big dollar numbers, 600 million and or even higher for some of those acquisitions, I won't say those companies were actually at revenue scale level. So to your point, yeah, it's not there, but I think the promise is there. And I don't know if it's public or not, but one of those companies, one of the startups that was acquired, they had gotten a big retailer to switch from Cisco to them. That's why Cisco went after acquiring it. Like, wait a minute, what's happening here? Then that was the tipping point for that startup, and hence for Cisco to take a serious look at that company. So I think you'll see more of those trends happening. The adoption is still slow because of the points that Lakshmi and Rob mentioned. I think it will happen over time. It's in the right direction.
Viptela.
Yeah. Viptela.
So I think that's a great point, and what you also mentioned. So when I was thinking SDN, I was saying that you going to an IT and saying that using word SDN. So that's not how you start those conversations. It will not play. So the way you should be that, how you will help them migrate your applications and how would you help them reduce their cost. So companies like, so when you hear a word like software-defined security, software-defined WAN, the companies, you build a company and then you go and tell them that this is how I will take away your services cost. This is how I will take away the number of contractors that you have working on managing this particular device. So if you start your conversation that way, then you can build a lot of these successful ideas and do it that way. So when I was mentioning SDN, I actually meant that using word SDN versus have that conversation about how do you bring the value to them, and then you could be a big disruptor. Call it software, and I kind of pick up on your last line. So software-defined automation. They understand what IT understand automation big time, because a lot of data centers and DevOps and CI/CD, you get the best developers from that world. Whether it is Spinnaker working with GCP, whether it is Kubernetes deployed in almost many ITs, and it's just awesome. The kind of application developers that you get in ITs is phenomenal. So have a conversation with them and how you help them build better application and reduce their cost. And then put software automation in front. That will definitely play.
Yeah, and you can still put network in there too.
I would like to take a different angle and take SDN out of data center where use cases are well understood, application-driven infrastructure. So if you look what SDN did to industry in general, especially on the one side, is really much larger than just making networking simpler, cheaper. It made us to build data modeling layer and get structured data, right? So finally, we are not just getting counters and treating box as a box. We could look at network as an entity and understand, make data look like information. We are building machine-to-machine interfaces. So all the stuff wouldn't have happened without the hype of SDN, right? So network is a bit better place today than it used to be before.
Any other questions?
Hello. There is a lot of talk going on nowadays regarding white boxes, next generation of OpenFlow and SDN. What is your take on this one?
What's our take on white boxes or Nextgen SDN?
Yeah, next gen SDN, white boxes.
Yeah, well, so I think it sort of comes back to the same thing. If there's a value prop from a business perspective, I think new technology can always help, right? Next generation well, I guess you're really talking about what about white boxes instead of brand name hardware? You know, I think the comparison I would make is it looks more like the open source model, right? What's the software that's running on that box? Because in reality, I mean, even at Cisco, we always joke, yeah, we're a hardware vendor, but it's all about the software, right? The software is really what makes the difference between something that runs well and something that runs poorly, something that's easy to manage or hard to manage, right? And so from a white box perspective, I think you see that. It's absolutely possible to build a network in a data center using purely white box technology with the absolute simplest of software. You don't even have to get custom software on it. You can absolutely make the connectivity work. But as soon as you start doing that, if you do need to deal with segmentation, if you do need to deal with some of the services that networks can do best, you end up starting to look at software-defined network technology to layer on top of that now simplified local network, right? And I think that's the thing, the trend that we will continue to see. The business value of SDN is driven by specific applications, application requirements, interactions and integrations with third parties. We haven't even talked about IoT or edge computing, some of these sorts of technologies where suddenly, again, it's the dynamic nature of these next generation services that we're seeing people just now be able to start to develop that are driving a need for more dynamic network resource, network access, network control. And that's what's driving changes in how SDN even functions in certain cases, right? But yeah, white box or not white box, that really depends on your support model.
Yeah, there is a lot of talk going on nowadays, P4 and white box, next generation of OpenFlow or something. That kind.
Well, but even OpenFlow as a technology is a very powerful technology if you have a need for it, right? And new capabilities are driving a need for it. It's easier to deal with dynamically changing environments by describing flows than it is by trying to describe access lists at the edge of the network, right? And so if you have advanced models of OpenFlow, if OpenNFV and some of the engines that are driving the management of those flows are getting better because the use cases I think are being better understood, right? the original OpenFlow code was designed around some examples that a set of college students dreamed up, right? That doesn't really map to business value, but over time it does map to business value because we start to understand how to use these technologies and how to use the control planes that we're being given access to. Right? So there are big shifts that happen there.
Yeah, so one of the critiques of OpenFlow that I've heard is that it's too much, it's very hard to implement in software. It depends too much on hardware, the way it is defined right now.
Right. Well, I mean, the initial OpenFlow required a particular hardware forwarding engine, right? So that was the original model, and then somebody rewrote it in software, and it works. It does work, but it's not the most performant thing in the world.
I think the thing with software defined is that it gives you a lot of flexibility, but then it puts a lot of complexity in operational model, right? So the balance would be that, you know, how much flexibility do you need and how much agility do you need? So if that's your primary driver, then the protocols, I call them southbound, right? P4 or OpenFlow or even BGP or any other protocol, they are just a way to get to that flexibility, and then you can build your own versions too. So white box, if you call white box, like I've seen, like, you know, there could be white boxes. The reason that, you know, just going back to what Robert said, that is the white boxes are flourishing because the power has gone into processors and NICs, right? And then you put some kind of specialized engine to make it look like a supercomputer. I truly believe all the machine learning and the like literally the supercomputers and the autonomous cars, the things we talk about, and then, you know, the use cases we just heard in the, you know, Amazon buying those companies, they wouldn't have been possible without the power of white boxes. I mean, because the amount of innovation that goes in, you really need to pick up pieces which are there and then build your power of your innovation, your startup, your idea into it to get the things off the ground. So I do believe that white box is not like a router kind of white boxes. To me, it could be a chip, it could be a microchip, it could be a Bluetooth. White boxes in that sense, you know, that is really important. And you see the consolidation happening in the industry. Like, look at all the consolidation on the chip side, right? Marvel and others, right? Broadcom, and then now you hear all these news about how all the companies' consolidations is happening. That kind of says that, you know, white boxes / the white label, let's say instead of white box, white label model is really taking, but we should also hear from Sanjeev and then how he's seeing it.
Yeah, I think the way we see it is, and you can look at several companies in the SDN space that are following this approach. They are trying to white label their hardware. It is a trend, and because a lot of what is in the hardware is getting commoditized, despite what Intel wants to sell, you know, in the market, still Intel is, despite the commoditization, Intel is able to survive well because of the scale we have and the market position we have. But if you look beyond, I think that's a trend that we have seen dramatically in the last 3-4 years, and you're only going to see that increase over time. And if you are able to create the values, move the value stack up into the software layer, whether it is at an application level or at the middleware level, I think you will gain more value from that. Going back to Viptela example, they had a Viptela branded box, where anybody could make that box. There was nothing in that box that was really that unique for them. You can start looking at other companies. Nutanix doesn't do a white label approach, but it's near that approach almost, right? So I think you'll see an increase of that trend going forward.
So actually, I have a question. So you mentioned IoT and, like, you know, the next generations. Intel is also, like, you know, big push on 5G and IoT. So what's your take on, like, you know, how, like, you know, where we are in that space and how network transformation is playing a role in that?
I think IoT is a mix, honestly speaking, at a very high level. IoT on consumer side has no business model. IoT on enterprise/industrial side has a pretty good business model, and that's where I think the money will really flow. Because on the consumer side, what if I connected your washing machine to the Nest thermostat? Washing machine would get the temperature automatically, and it will modulate itself automatically. Or same thing with the refrigerator, and people are say, okay, yeah, what? And what if I charge you $49 a month for that service? Nobody's going to pay that. So there is no compelling use case for that level of automation driven by so-called IoT. On the enterprise/industrial side, from a use case perspective, if you start putting sensors in a factory, and if you can get data real time and hence predict when a particular machine is going to go down, that could be millions of dollars of savings for that company. So there's a big business ROI there. So I think you're going to see a lot of IoT innovation happen towards the enterprise plus industrial segment. And SDN will play a critical role there. And to Rob's point, to Rob's earlier point, I think IoT will have a bimodal distribution where edge will get smarter over time, not just the cloud. You can look at an autonomous vehicle, for example. If one car sees an accident or bump on the road, you want that data to pretty quickly go. You want that car to quickly analyze that data versus sending the image to the cloud and waiting for that network. Networks are choked already. We start adding billions of more IoT devices and hope the video and the imagery will go to the cloud, and the cloud will run the model and give me a real-time answer. It's not going to happen. So that is driving edge to become more intelligent, edge to have more machine learning on that edge device itself, and then finally send maybe the inference from that data point rather than sending everything to the cloud. And then you can also, there's also a talk of, for example, bringing blockchain into IoT. That's, I think it's almost
Way to get more funding.
more funding. It's another. I think there is. We have looked at blockchain from an investment thesis standpoint. I think it's pretty disruptive. It almost takes us back, before the cloud onset of cloud, it takes us back to the distributed computing model. And I think it will happen as more devices, connected devices, come up in the world, because you cannot have clouds all the time. As the trusted authority, you can distribute authority across X number of nodes and have blockchain manage that. So that's how we see IoT, and from an Intel Capital standpoint, we are investing pretty heavily into IoT. Intel acquired Mobileye from Israel for over $15 billion. That's in the autonomous driving space. That's one of the key focus areas for Intel's IoT group. We also acquired Wind River 8+ years ago, which is an embedded operating system. Anywhere you go, you never see Wind River inside, like Intel or Microsoft or Android, but it's Wind River powering your ATM machine and everything else. So Intel as a company is very serious about how IoT will grow and how particularly machine learning will be driven to the edge, because for Intel, the more compute on more devices, the better it is.
Do you see, you were saying that the commercial aspects of IoT are probably driving the actual business and actual sort of value in the IoT value chain, especially for investment purposes. Do you see that value driving improved performance in the consumer space? I mean, in a sense, I actually think IoT in automobiles is kind of a consumer use, right? Because it's the consumer that's going to end up having to somehow put the $50 a month to get IoT value into their car kind of bill, or deal with the higher prices of their vehicles because it's been embedded in the cost.
Yeah. I think on the consumer, I gave a home example with a lot of startups have tried and nothing has panned out. At best, I've seen insurance as a potential business model here. Insurance companies saying, hey, if you put sensors in your home and I can see a leak before it becomes big, I'll pay you for that. But even that's early. I think to answer your question, what we are seeing is car is maybe the only one that kind of interfaces between consumer and enterprise. But beyond that, most of the IoT innovation is really focused on enterprise side. Now, over time, you can imagine maybe it will trickle down on the consumer side, but we haven't seen that necessity or that compelling use case till now. And there are companies that have, I would say, run out of steam waiting for that model. There's a portfolio company of ours called Ariant. It was acquired recently. It did okay. It was an IoT company bringing software connected devices in the home, and it had big hopes. This was 3-4 years ago, but it hasn't panned out. And that's what we are seeing as a trend, not just for that company.
So you mentioned in the industrial application of IoT, right? Like predicting when a machine could fail and things like that. So just reminded me of Facebook conversation I had recently. Somebody had posted a video of a water turbine to use ocean currents. And I was like, why is it not everywhere? And somebody commented because of the maintenance problem. And I was like, why can't we solve it by predicting or putting a sensor there that the machinery has broken down and then put it on the network somewhere that it needs maintenance and maintain that way. Do you see some of that kind of work happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. We all look at IoT as either something that touches us as a consumer or something that we see in the IT space, in the tech space, I would rather say. But the real IoT is connecting archaic industries, whether it is railroads, whether it is or other archaic industries, almost ancient. They are ripe for innovation. But if you can bring connectivity and machine learning to those, that's real IoT. There are actually companies we are seeing. One company that we came across called Vitronics, W-I-Tronics. Siemens, we are not investors, we have no relationship with the company, but they are bringing IoT into the railroad space, which I was quite surprised about. And I started asking them, hey, are they really adopting this? You go to them with a solution, do they understand? Do they really adopt? And the company is getting some good traction at least. So we are starting to see those trends, but I think one of the things we always ask ourselves and question even ourselves on is why now? Because a lot of things are possible conceptually, but when we invest, we have to make sure it is now meaning in the next 1 or 2 years, this company can get traction versus 5 years from now. Because otherwise you're just too early in the market and the money will go nowhere.
So just, so most of these, say retail company which have made the biggest transformation, Amazon being one, and Target has invested in Walmart. So the first investment that they did was in supply chain, which means trucks, shipping, and containers. So that's how, Amazon, if you look at Amazon use cases, that's where they made the biggest kind of changes. How do you deliver something fast, all the way from a shipping deck, which got shipped from one part of the world to another part of the world, enabling, and that is all IoT, right? RFID enablement, then you track it through some kind of camera or some kind of device. And to me, so transportation is something which has already disrupted it. And then logistics, a lot of logistics. Today, like if you want to ship something from Minnesota to here, you don't know, a truck starts and that guy keeps calling you. So logistics is another space which is using it. And again, normal day-to-day life, which consumers like me will be helped with, but at the same time enterprises will make a lot of money and completely disruption in that space. So there are shipping and logistics and transportation are something which all these companies like retail, they make use of that to get their business forward. And then if you look at those examples, taking example of Amazon, like they built a lot of these clouds and distributed data centers and fulfillment centers and shipping centers, and then they have enabled IoT all across industrial as well as moving. But then one of the points that the reason that why now, right? Because now software is so tightly integrated, You have so many lighter protocols working on so many lighter devices that it's feasible for you to remotely manage all of that. So I believe that it's right technologies, and then the innovation happening, like the Moore's law kind of applying, and better protocols, better software coming in, and these are the areas which have really enabled, like other than the verticals like industrial automation, and then autonomous cars, like billions of IoTs running on a car. So yeah, a lot of retail space has really been disrupted because of shipping and transportation. Thank you.
So yeah, we have 5 minutes, so one last question from
Yes. First question. Being closely involved.
Oh.
Especially high.
Hello. Hi. Sanjay, the question I had for you was, at what level do I have to come in at? I mean, it's ironic you mentioned Meraki. I was talking to Meraki before you bought him, and then that was the end of the conversation. Do you have to come in at before Intel Capital starts looking at you? The second question is, are any of you guys doing anything with medical?
With medical,
Yeah, and I mean more than just a Fitbit, which everybody loses.
what was the last sentence you said?
And more than just a Fitbit, something more serious along with patient monitoring or disease outbreak monitoring, which is where I'm focused at. Third question is, given this recent FCC decision, how do you see that affecting networking?
Yeah, so I'll go in order. First question, what stage do we invest into?
What stage do I have to come at you?
For Intel Capital to fund. So we are, I would say overall we are stage agnostic, but our sweet spot is around Series A plus. So at a point when you have a few pilots that have moved into production, you have early revenue, you know what market you are going after, you have developed a product, you have found your product market fit, and from there on you want to scale customers and partners. That's when we come in, Series A plus. A typical check size we write is $5 to $10 million. I will mention that increasingly we are writing even bigger check sizes. So the focus really is how do we make a bigger impact, have more ownership in the company, and hence bring more strategic impact to Intel as well. That's driving that change as well. But I would say Series A plus is still really the focus point. I have done seed deals as well. We do seed investments as well. We have funded companies and universities, startups that are university spin-offs, and in those cases we invest like 200K, 300K. But that's not really the top focus for Intel Capital. Second question was on medical side and our Fitbit like money.
Better beyond that. You were talking about how IoT is really going to be focused on the enterprise and not the consumer. But you have something.
Yeah, IoT in a hospital, right? I mean,
Or IoT in a patient. That's getting to the patient that last mile is hard. It's difficult. Costs, pharmaceutical costs, random dots or something like that. Closing that mile using IoT will give both the enterprise and consumer in the same.
Yeah. So I invested in a company called Basis Science. I did that investment 2013. Within 8 or 9 months, Intel actually ended up acquiring the company. Was a very good exit financially for Intel Capital. But I'll tell you, honestly speaking, Basis, what the company did was, this was pre-iWatch days. It had, I would characterize it as a health watch. It could do your sleep monitoring, it could do sweat analysis, a lot of and their vision was that as the device scales, they'll get so much data and then they can do a lot more analytics and hopefully sell analytics as a service. That vision never panned out, okay? Despite the successful financial exit, I'll say tell you that vision never panned out, and it was integrated into Intel's wearables group. At that time, Intel was looking at, hey, maybe wearables is really the next big thing, next big computing thing. So I want to have this capability, and that's why Intel acquired the company. But I think wearables as a market has really not panned out. And I used to think that the top use case to drive wearable adoption will be healthcare, will be the kind of things you're talking about. If a doctor wants to make sure that consumers, my heart rate is being monitored more continuously rather than once a month when I go to the doctor, hey, you have the data. The problem is, if you look at the healthcare sector, there's huge spending happening. I don't remember the latest number, but $2 to $3 trillion a year. 50% of that comes from governments, and most of the remaining comes from corporates, from companies. Consumers actually, despite the fact that we all feel we have to spend a lot on healthcare, we actually don't spend much. And the number one problem in the healthcare system, forget investment, forget technology, all that, in the healthcare system, the number one problem is not technology. The number one problem is care. So when you have a market where, and on top of that, it's a regulated market, keep in mind. HIPAA compliance, you can't take the data, it's not easily accessible. Right? So in that kind of a scenario, when you as a startup or Basis or anybody else comes up with a new tech solution, goes to a hospital, they say, okay, it's interesting, but my budget is tied to providing better care first, then I'll come to your tech solution. And that has been the case. That has been consistently the problem with healthcare. And that's why healthcare, you don't see, when you see startup, when you see SDN startup, they're not going after healthcare as the first market for that reason.
On the healthcare front, I did some work for a couple NGOs overseas, India, Africa areas, and there, the NGOs would love to have wearable devices that they could help, monitoring diabetes and all kinds of other disease-related factors in that fashion, because otherwise they get, again, a data point a month when they get somebody to come through a clinic, but there they have the problem of funding. Who's going to pay for it? You and I might buy a watch because it helps us keep track of our health, but in most of the world, they don't have the money for that.
What about that middle technology program that was going on back in the 60s? I can't sell you a tracker because it costs too much, but I can sell you something that costs me 30 and now that does 10 more things than the regular tracker would do. What happened to that? Middle technology, I think, appropriate, it was either called appropriate, we didn't change the middle technology at all.
In 1960s?
Started in the 60s, I guess Neil Gershensberg of MIT, Gershenfeld of MIT has doing work with that now. I'm surprised he hasn't gotten into metals.
I don't know if anybody else is aware.
I don't remember, but I just have a question.
Yes.
So when you're talking about all the investments, that's not just the wearable investment, right? Because some of the use cases that we see, at least now, being in Google, and I hear a lot of machine learning and AI doing, is that like how the care could be better, and like going back to NGOs, that what if we can create a scanning device which will become a wearable, and then you take it to some countries like where people don't have access to it, right? And then you can use those devices and then go and scan somebody's say some report, right? Scanning the report, scanning if you have a pacemaker, maybe you don't have access to it, and supporting elderly people who used to just kind of do just a click of the button kind of thing, instead of consistently monitoring them with the body movement. So those are some areas where I hear, which is not really wearables for the kind of fancy wearables thing, but really using technologies for providing healthcare in places where it was not accessible, and to the set of people who are I would say mobility constrained. So is that an area where you see some growth happening, or even that is kind of constrained?
We do see those things happening, for example, in India and China, where there is no care available. Instead of that, you at least get some care available. But like Rob mentioned, pricing becomes somewhat of a prohibition even there, and that's the challenge. What we have seen is, but to your point, actually, what we have seen is some companies that are coming up with new pure non-hardware, pure data-oriented solutions for healthcare, they'll actually first go to Asia to implement because regulations are more lax there. They can get better adoption there, and they can even get access to that data more easily. So we've seen that trend in several cases, and then they'll try for US, go through HIPAA compliance, etc. But it takes time.
To your comment, you need to be the size of Philips to be able to sell into highly regulated markets. If you think about where to get budget for next quarter, it's not your market. So again, you need to be Philips alike, who's completely focused on wearables and health. They spin out everything else. Otherwise, I agree with you. You just don't have enough budget to fight the government.
It's almost like education. We all love education as a market. We all want kids to get educated and everything. It's such a massive market, but there's very little innovation happening. It's very similar reasons. That just like healthcare education is also a highly regulated market. If I create a startup and go to in the K-12 space and go to a school and say, hey, I have a better solution to teach chemistry, school unions and boards will just oppose it right away.
A few words about 5G you asked. So finally 3GPP finalized release 16 in December and identified a few new use cases. The most important are enhanced mobile broadband, meaning we want to sell you a modem and compete with cables and DSLs, and critical communications. So mostly to address niche use cases in verticals when you have robotics, when you have IoT devices on machinery. So no wonders, work is just to get started. They just renamed a bunch of interfaces from using S-word to N-word. There is no correlation to any transport. They promise 1 gig down to the subscriber. Guess what? There's no transport for 1 gig. So all this stuff is going to be built in the next 5 to 7 years, and hype is there, but technology is not.
Oh, we're 4 minutes past, okay.
I just wanted to ask, this year just started, and what kind of disruptive changes you expect? It would be interesting. Thank you. Trends.
In
or-
general or SDN?
Yeah, in trends, maybe like blockchain, maybe SDN.
The way we look at it, and I'm taking a very broad view here, not an Intel view only. I think we are seeing digitization as a big trend, and as companies learn more about digitization and they adopt digitization, that's when they get more disruptive, self-disruptive rather. And data is the new oil under that. So any company that has lock on data, differentiated data at scale, will have tremendous value. So whenever we look at especially application-oriented companies, we always ask ourselves, how does this company get an unfair advantage in collecting data? Because over time, a lot of the algorithms, whether it's machine learning algorithms or other algorithms, are getting open sourced. So whether you may have access to it today, you may have tuned them better today. 2 years from now, somebody else will. And at that point, your lasting differentiation is the data that you have, because you can leverage that to train your algorithms better than your competitor at that time. And in that big trend of digitization, with data as a new oil, you can put blockchain, you can put AI, you can put other such sub-blocks underneath that are enabling that trend of digitization. I wrote on LinkedIn, it was actually just some quick thought, I didn't even put too much thinking into the numbers, but that post became a little too viral to my utter surprise. I wrote down that 90% of the CEOs, I'm talking of corporates, 90% of the corporate CEOs are probably thinking about digitization, but only 10% are doing something about it. And companies, CEOs who don't act on it will probably be left behind. Every 2 weeks, there's one company leaving Fortune 500, S&P 500, every 2 weeks. So it doesn't come out as a big trend, but slowly there's a churn happening in every industry, whether it is transportation, whether it is retail, whether it is industry, etc., etc. And that's a trend we are going to see more of, I feel, and it's an opportunity as well for Intel as a company, for Intel Capital to invest in companies that are enabling that trend, for a lot of companies.
I think the disruptive, well, the potentially destructive technology is the inability to change. I've talked to a number of companies that are trying to figure out how to migrate. It's like they've kind of glommed onto containers, and sort of the simplification that does to their infrastructure is the answer, but they don't know how to get there. And in a sense, they're right. If they can't figure out how to move to this different packaging model, this different network access model, the different services that are being driven by that sort of more advanced or maybe just more modern automation ecosystem, that's what's going to disrupt. Because even though they might be the leader in their particular market, if they can't keep up with some startup that says, well, I'll plug 8 SaaS services together and tie machine learning in for my cloud provider and do the same thing that you were doing, but now I also have the ability to accelerate my application deployments, right? I can tie into the edge services because I can give you a container that includes my code that does the work that you need at the edge. That's, I think, where I'm starting to see things that are disrupting how people do their business.
Yeah, no, I also, maybe I looked at your, at one of the posts too, but, and digitization, like, everything is becoming e-commerce, commerce, and then every single, I believe like in few years, every single company would be in some kind of cloud because they want some web presence, right? So, absolutely, and what it has done, and I'll take example like say, recommendation, like I like that example, recommendations that you get on your web pages, taking to AdWords and other things. So what has it done? It has brought the power in consumers' hand. Digitization has disrupted because it has given power, instead of enterprises, take example of Uber, take example of a loyalty app. Every single company has loyalty app these days. And then it gives me as a consumer power to decide what I want, right? And then that's where the power of data comes in. So the power that enterprises will be left with, whether Uber, the biggest disruptor, the reason that they could then do that disruption, because of the data, right? You're just picking up data, you're just bringing Waze, right? Look at like Waze getting acquired by, competing with other companies. But it's really the data that you're collecting. So the company that will make good use of that data and really driven by majority of customers, like, billions of customers, is the one that will it's about velocity, using the data, but that happened because of the digitization. So yeah, all those 3 points, automation and disruption because of digitization, making data, the most critical asset for any company.
Google as a search engine.
Yes, absolutely. Search engine, AdWords, see, I brought it in. And then you're right, like machine learning and all those algorithms, that's why I brought in TensorFlow, right? Deep learning. A lot of the work that Google has been doing in that space, you see all of that in open source. Kubernetes, open source, Istio, open source. Because, you believe that you want to collect data and help billions of people, and I can maybe just pitch Google's kind of vision. It's just, organizing the information of billions of people,
Yes.
and just helping through the data. So that's what it's really about.
Yeah, like, Google was not the first search engine, right? Yeah. But it was the best, so that's why.
That's the best.
And one of my favorite examples in networking is of a disruptor technology is WhatsApp. Telecom space. Messaging used to be a major source of revenue until applications like WhatsApp came along. Yeah. So
I agree.
Right, business.
It took, I saw this graph and I don't remember exactly, but it took like 20 to 30 years for those traditional telephone adoption. And WhatsApp had 450 million users at the time of acquisition, and they had that within like 4 years or so. So the pace of technology adoption has gotten much faster, and it's only going up as time progresses.
Yeah. So on that positive note, I think we can close the panel and start on the developer talks. So I'll ask Michelle to take over and call our next lightning talk. So the format of the talk is the developers will talk for 5 minutes, and then there's 10 minutes for feedback and Q&A from you guys. So just stay here. Maybe, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
So you have 5 minutes to talk and then 10 minutes. Okay, so we'll have this second.
Oh my God.
You were in the
Yeah,
first,
that's
the first
right.
switching order.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Jeff's going first. So, you're gonna spend a couple minutes introducing yourself. So the purpose of this is, so Jeff, the innovators are gonna present their idea. Oh. So the idea here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the purpose of this section here is we're going to give some of our developers a chance to talk about their ideas, their work on their projects. And so we're giving them 5 minutes to tell you a little about themselves and about their project, and then we're going to open it up for 10 minutes of Q&A for you guys to ask questions or give input. So the first one is Jeff.
I'm Jeff. I'm as much networking guy as one could be, and I would love to talk about BGP, but that's not why you're here. I'm going to talk about edge computing. So last time I was here, I was talking about SDN and startup doing SDN things. And it's doing pretty well. It's a startup in Spain, and we're doing our stuff. But for me, it's yesterday. It's done deal. So what's next? And I believe it is edge computing. There's huge opportunities. It's coming. And not only because we need it as a consumer, it's the last hope of telcos. If they don't succeed to build edge platforms and attract over-the-top people to share revenue with them, they're done. They already dump pipes to provide data. Now there's an opportunity to put a bit of compute somewhere close to base station or CMTS or DSLAM and get some piece of the pie. So, my slides? Sure.
Do you have slides?
Yes, I sent to you.
Sorry. You need to keep talking. I'll go get your slides.
So, there are two parts to it. There's mobile edge computing, as we call it now, multi-access, because it's not only mobile. Potentially you could put something close to end subscriber at cable modem, CMTS location, DSLAM location, but the radio is still the main use case. So all the focus goes, how do we integrate mobile edge compute platform next to base station? And if you don't know, there are a lot of problems with signaling. In most cases, traffic from base station in radio back to the packet core is encrypted. Encrypted traffic cannot be sent to mobile edge compute platform. So regulations, how to decrypt traffic, how to share keys, there's a lot of problems to be solved. So this is a separate thing. I'll be talking about more how do we deploy edge computing for verticals, for floors, difference between warm and hot data. And what's really needed in platform, and could give you some ideas for the next startup. There are already a number of startups who are still stealth mode working on similar approaches. They're trying to work with Siemens, with OGSS, and this kind of people of our world. And problem hasn't been solved. When you deploy your device, it's cheaper to throw it away than to upgrade. When you deploy it, you want it to be secure. We've seen last year horrible DOS attacks because these small devices are not secure. security is last thing you would implement if you sell it for $5. So how to secure it, how to provide lifecycle management, how to upgrade it, and how to provide the same visualization layer. But remember, it's not your host with 2 tera hard drive and 32 gig of memory. It's something fraction of it. If you take vanilla hypervisor, you are talking about 2 gig of memory, right? So bringing it down to 2 megs is an interesting and quite complicated way while providing hardware assisted. While slides are coming, another topic I would love to talk to you next time would be data modeling, what it means to networking. I'm very excited about what can be done with data modeling, structured data, ability to do learning on top of it, and what we did in ATF OpenConfig, how it's being used in real networking. Quite exciting topic, at least for me.
Yeah, please do, please do. Yeah, last email I got from this before. I have shift.
And that's favorite.
Just if you could, yeah, just. Slides up.
So we are in a new era of computing. No, not yet. So personal computing, 300 billion market by now, started 1990s. It was mostly used to increase productivity. We got Word, Excel, and all that stuff. Mobile computing that started about 15 years ago was all about communication. We started as person-to-person communication. Today it's a lot about machine-to-machine communication, but still a lot of communication between people to things, things to things. Cloud computing came about 7 years ago, but today 1 billion plus market, much more, 100 billion. It's all about utility. As we see today, what Google's, Amazon's provide, it's compute as utility. We can do our things on their infrastructure. Edge computing is needed because not everything could be done centrally. A lot of things, due to regulations, due to latency constraints, to proximity, have to be done locally and near real time. So if you look what's done today, we've seen an announcement from AWS or Greengrass Google and Microsoft are coming with similar platform. What they do, they provide cloud APIs closer to the endpoints. However, what they don't do, they don't have the processing capability. They have very limited logic to how to react on particular events. So they rely on ability to send data back to the cloud, irrespectively whether data is warm or hot. So warm data could potentially be processed remotely. Hot data has 1 millisecond or less span of life, so you either react on it or it's dead. It's meaningless. So if you look at today's IoT model, it's fully centralized. Everything being transported back to data centers by using IoT gateways, by using green grass-like devices, we lose proximity. So when reaction needs to be within millisecond, cannot be done. So as we look at it tomorrow, we see that more and more devices are going to create meshes. So if you think about fog compute notion, it's distributed workload, locally computed, locally done, very little amount of information, probably just the storage part goes back. There is absolutely critical separation between hot and warm data. If you are on fabric floor and you cannot react to particular events within microseconds, and so talking to people like Siemens, they are not talking milliseconds, they are talking microseconds. So it's such a short period of time. If you need to put a piece of data on the cable, before you even start sending it, you're already out of time. So it's mandatory to be able to provide such capability at the edge, possibly within tens of meters of devices. So edge hierarchy, we always think about ability to provide more compute and more bandwidth. So if you look at the slide, the part that is low bandwidth but high compute is economically unviable due to the price versus revenue delivered. So it's a market that's going to open now and going to grow significantly within the next 3-4 years, especially given the upcoming 5G ability to provide separate networking, separate slicing to this kind of networking. So it's needed and it doesn't exist. So if you think of next startup, it could be something for you. So what we are trying to do at the edge is to bring together what we do on the cloud, where everything is virtualized, automated, and immutable. On the embedded side of things, things are physical, distributed, and very low level. Some of them are still coded in assembly or C. So they cannot afford to have Java piece of code taking 50 meg of memory. So very different paradigms, very different types of deployments. The new platform is going to come at the edge, has to combine those both, being real-time, being secure, and providing so intrinsically security. If you deploy it somewhere at the edge, you should be able to distribute keys, you should be able to provide encryption, you should be able to build an overlay without need someone going there and doing particular configuration. So it's kind of new type of system type we don't know yet. And there are many companies in this space providing different capabilities. However, none of them does all of it and does it in a way it would work at the new age. So again, I think there's a lot of opportunities to provide secure, manageable networking to those devices, as well as new virtualization layer that doesn't exist today. And it should be simple, secure, manageable, and open sourcing at least the core of it. I would say, as of today, pretty much mandatory. If you don't have large community contributing, working on it, it's not going to succeed. Questions?
Question? So, do you? So, are you recommending that this kind of cloud platform be enabled at this IoT edge, which is same as the edge computing paradigm that people are talking about? Is that the same thing, or are you moving it further down to the base station and are recommending that different kinds of hardware be being built to put this kind of cloud image?
Absolutely. So if you look at mobile edge computing use cases, there are really none. The only one being discussed is VR, AR, right? It's non-existent market. There are not enough devices. They're too expensive. So investing into hardware at base station level, and investment would be done by people like Tower America and people who own real estate is unclear. It's a lot of money with unclear returns. In this case, it's mostly about automation and verticals and working with companies like Siemens, like Dell, like HP, who are building these small devices and providing proper virtualization and lifecycle management top of it.
And so tell me again, so are you saying that there will be a new kind of device with new specifications, because the current hardware that sits close to base station, that has a very stringent parameters, right, which you talked about, right, a few megs, and so are you saying that that newer hardware with different capabilities supporting multiple verticals should be placed in the same location, or you would move it out to a different location?
I would probably do it even closer than base station, and we will see densification of base station anyway, as 5G requires it. There's existing hardware that doesn't have virtualization capabilities today, and usually when you need to upgrade it, you throw it away. So it's not very flexible in terms of life cycle. And moreover, if you want to run third-party VNFs on it, it's impossible because due to size and amount of memory and compute, there is no virtualization layer. So a new type of very thin hypervisor is to come.
You're not recommending putting VNFs on top of it, right? You're just...
I do, but it could be as thin as something with unikernel, something that's extremely, extremely small and efficient.
Okay. Somebody.
So there is a program called as OpenEdge, which basically follows the same thing, right? So there is a program called as OpenEdge, actually, which follows a similar model. It's offshoot from OpenStack, I think. And pretty much the community out there exists, which is trying to solve pretty much this problem and beyond. Like, once you get to this level, what you really need to think about is also the high availability. For example, this edge services, once they are up there on the edge, and for example, the base station goes off, the ability to actually replicate all the services that were running on this edge onto another edge, so that the end device, which was actually rendering the service from this edge, continues to get the service, is there is some initiative going on in this area. I'm a little bit involved, but I keep reading on that every now. It's basically, they've used terms like cloudlets and everything over there a lot to define such environments.
So specifically to mobile use case, they're completely decoupled from mobile semantics. If you look at today's mobility, it's an unsolved problem. As you move from base station to base station, you change IP address, TCP breaks, your identity breaks. It's a problem much larger than anything else in today's mobile world. And it will take another 10 years to solve it. Specifically to cloud management, and OpenStack is a cloud management problem. It's extremely heavyweight. If you look what happened to OpenStack in general, it got choked by its own weight, right? It's impossible to deploy it without 10 people from Miranda's on site. It's impossible to upgrade it in a way it doesn't package services.
Call me and I can do it with one person on site.
It's just you. Not everybody is you. So what I'm talking about is much more compact, something that understands how to work with very limited hardware in a way it's still efficient and zero touch.
Okay, so I think we're probably out of time, Ace, or we?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so So next up, Siobhan. And you're going to be talking about service fractal?
Yep.
Oh, sure.
Hello. Thank you very much. Basically, this is about Service Fractal. This is a new startup. I've been working on this. We have been working on this for about a year plus now, and we originally started around almost 2 years ago. That's when I started to work on this. Basically, we're talking about agile and secure networking, and everything is SaaS-based. And it's basically for enterprises, branch offices, and campus. So, unfortunately, I don't have the complete animation here because I'm running a PDF deck out here. I don't want to take the risk of running everything through Google Slides and internet and so on and so forth. But what we really have, you can actually see at the bottom of the stack is we have all kinds of networking equipment in our IT today. We have firewalls, we have people, we have, and shrinking budgets. That's what we have. But at the top, what we're really looking for at the end of the day is, can I monitor what is happening on my network? That's all I need. I mean, I need to know the bandwidth, I need to know some capacity utilization and some of those things. And I also want to make sure that I can address any kind of zero-day attacks. Okay, am I capable of handling that? That's all from a technology point of view. But from a business point of view, the corporate is constantly looking at, okay, how can I manage OpEx here? Can I move everything from CapEx to OpEx? And can I make sure that when there is a data breach that I have good answers for as to why that thing happened or how much it's going to cost me? Are we following all the industry best practices? Do we have the right kind of insurance and so on and those kinds of things. And they also want to constantly reduce the support costs so that they can actually invest on innovation. That's their main goal. But in order to do that, we all have to incur a tremendous amount of tax. Okay, we are the highest paid, taxed country. I mean, thanks to Trump, I guess now it's all going down. But again, we are paying through network tax today. DevOps tools, so you have to get GitHub accounts, set up OpenStack, get more and more VMs. Okay, have IT give me more IP addresses and set up networks and so on and so forth. Then I also have to spend my money on trying to do skills training for all of these people, change management, and then the guys leave, and then I'm stuck with all the old legacy hardware and that kind of stuff, and I can't move. So we have all kinds of things, including custom automation. So that's the tax that we really pay. So it's the same thing. What we are doing is we are taking away all of those taxes and giving you a huge tax cut. How are we doing it? We're moving everything to the cloud. Don't worry about not running the same kind of software. It's going to be much more agile and scale and those kinds of things. And we also have a marketplace of microservices. Today, that's one of the things. Think of it like a Tesla. You had a nice BMW, but now you went and bought a Tesla just because that you can actually go and get a cruise control feature whenever you want it. You can subscribe to that, and you want there's a hurricane in Florida, and somebody wanted, another extra 60 miles, so they got a power pack, and they could actually extend the life for the car so that they can actually drive 60 more miles. Those kinds of services are auto park feature and so on and so forth. Those are the kinds of microservices that we are actually providing. And it's also one of the things that the current networks don't really do is that they don't provide you an opportunity for doing additional things or something that is exciting. Whether they work or not, that's to be seen, but the opportunity to do that is the most important thing. So one of the things that we did was that we actually deployed this for the Intel hands-on lab. This was a few months ago in September. So it was right here in the Marriott. We had around, over 2 days, we had around 105 clients or something like that who connected and that kind of stuff. It took me only 15 minutes to set up the network on a hotel network, and we had all the suites and that kind of stuff, and it only took me 15 minutes to tear it down completely. So everything, Intel has been gracious enough. They have provided us with servers and that kind of stuff. I've been running OVS with DPDK and that. And that is what really happened. And we were running like SSH and YouTube live traffic and so on and so forth on that network. And nobody knew that it was actually a complete SDN network running from the cloud and so on and so forth. That's the thing. And apart from that, we also have POCs currently going on with Allied Telesis and HP Aruba and Rhino Labs and with OVS. They have all been gracious enough to lend hardware so that they really want to make sure that they want to get their customers start using their networks in the least possible time. That means when the sales guy, when he goes and rings up an order and the switch is delivered to the customer, they want it to be up and running with all the dashboards and everything that they can actually show it to their bosses within the next 15 minutes. And that's exactly what we are trying to do. Real-time network monitoring and everything that they can actually do within the next 15 minutes. And that greatly helps with some of the deployment. And so what kind of advantages that we have? So we have some pure infrastructure benefits. The infrastructure benefits involve, this is mainly for us that we can actually provision a new tenant in a matter of seconds. We have a fully multi-cloud infrastructure that we have actually built on a public cloud, complete global management. And the other thing that I was talking about is network deployment is in less than 30 minutes. And the other cool part of it is that when you take the switch out from a 1 gig switch and replace it with a 100 gig switch, absolutely no issues. So we can just work the next moment. So that's something that you don't really see out there in the marketplace. We also do like all kinds of real-time network monitoring. It is real-time, not really near real-time. It is actually real-time. You pull the cable from the port of a switch port, it is automatically shown out there. There is actually revision control of configuration. There are no APIs. And the other thing is that all the data is actually streamlined. So we are not really using big data, but we are actually doing a lot of things. For the entire 2 days of traffic at the Intel hands-on lab for about, we handled around 83 gigs. We got only like less than 60K of traffic was actually sent from the switch to actually put out all the graphs and everything. And it's all on monthly subscription basis. Everything is done by algorithms. So what are we doing right now? We are self-funded. We're trying to raise $5 million Series A round at this point in time, mainly for marketing and sales and some of those items. And the team is myself and Mark Hafner, who is we all come from Sun. He was a Sun distinguished engineer. I used to work at Sun and Infoblox and Microsoft. And we are looking at around $3.5 billion is the big TAM that we are looking at from an SDN application space. And some of the people who have really started to embrace SDN are like Gap, who's doing like 3,500 stores with SD-WAN. Where NSX, they have $1 billion plus revenue in their NSX monitoring, virtualization, and micro-segmentation as the main components. And you have all the cloud Wi-Fi, that's Aruba and Cisco, Meraki, and those kinds of people. That's at least another $5.4 billion market out there. Basically, the embracement of the IT to actually let their devices be managed from the cloud is the opportunity that's how I look at it. And of course, Internet 2 and so on. Switch vendors, as I mentioned, have Allied Telesis, Cisco, they all work with our software in the cloud today. And Intel White Box with OVS also works. And Faucet is the SDN controller that we actually use that I've been a contributor for. Faucet is basically call it as the open source version of the Google's internal SDN controller. And there's a team in Google also who's working on that, and I'm also a chief contributor. And I'm also part of the Faucet Foundation charter member. So what we are really offering is a network tax cut and a productivity act. So that's what Service Factor really provides today. And you can call us for deployment. We are open for business. Thank you.
Any questions?
How much funding have you raised till now? I know you're raising $5 million now.
It's all self-funded. So I've invested, I've been working on this full time. So Mark is also the other person. So I've been working on this full time for close to 2 years now.
And what's the feedback from the early customers? I know you are in POC mode.
Yeah, I mean, feedback you can ask Sujata here about how the event went at Intel. We did it for two different events. One was this event with the service fractal software itself from the cloud. And previously last March, also we did another event, but that was with open source software. At that point in time, it was like a 3-day event. And unfortunately, I could not even lock the hardware, so I had to set up the hardware every day and take it out and then come back again, put it next day. It worked just fine, so it worked fine. I think Sujata can actually answer the.
Yeah, so basically he provided wireless connection for our hands-on lab. Our experience when we do these hands-on lab off-site is always like, especially in hotels, the connection is not good. Like, because in the hands-on lab we have to do SSH and SSH to our servers which are sitting in New Mexico. So that needs bandwidth actually. So, but with his deployment, it was as good as though we were in Intel office in both the times. But the total network bandwidth was the same, right? The only difference was that his stack was basically optimizing the Wi-Fi connection, which was using that pipe. No, we were using the hotel wired connection.
Total wired connection.
That was shared by 50 plus users in the room. So that was enabled by his stack.
Plus, they also had access to the complete NOC dashboard. So that was one thing. I mean, when you talk about a network, setting up a network is not that big of a deal, okay? But putting out an entire NOC dashboard in terms of what was going on the wire in terms of capacity utilization and how many clients were getting connected and so on and so forth, including the MAC addresses to everything, dynamically showing them and what ports and that kind of stuff. I think that was the other key benefit out of that. I think some of the guys who came and looked at it, they were simply amazed as to how they could get a complete dashboard too when they had never seen something like that. That was one thing.
And the hotel's connections are really pathetic. I'm just sitting here, and last DPDK summit in Bangalore, we actually had to modify our hands-on lab to have VMs on USB drives because, because the hotel was not guaranteeing or it was too expensive for us.
So that was one thing, and to talk about, we have it working with HP Aruba and switches and light telesis switches and that kind of stuff. They can speak. We have people from Allied out here, and we have been in Bloodfest and that kind of stuff with Google and so on. And it's never been an issue.
I'm sorry, I missed your last point. So you need the access to the port on the switches, right? That's what I heard. So how does it work? What I heard was that in order to get access to this information, you need access to the ports on the switches.
No. What I said was when you plug anything either to the switch, when you plug your laptop, say for example, to the switch port, immediately it is recognized. So the only thing that anybody needs to configure is that they basically go in. The deployment is as simple as this: you to buy a brand new switch, stick it into a rack. The only thing that you do is, apart from bring the management IP, is put the controller IP to our cloud. And that's it. Everything from then on, it's completely managed remotely through the cloud. And there is no extra software. Today what happens is that you have to have SNMP and software and CMDBs, configuration management databases running inside the network and that kind of stuff. In order to make all of those things happen, you don't need any of that stuff. Automatically it is happening through the cloud.
How many companies have you talked to that actually let their management network talk to the cloud?
Oh, that's exactly the reason as to why I put the, if you look at Cisco, Meraki, or HP Aruba, all the controllers are in the cloud. They don't have any on-site. So that's a $5.4 billion market that you're talking about, cloud Wi-Fi market.
So what they are doing is they offered Wi-Fi as a service, and then they leverage that to collect the data and offer value-added services and a display. So what I heard you saying was that you will reduce the network tax on existing enterprise applications by allowing a common set of configuration management and viewing capability. So which is different from you offering a connectivity service and then adding value on top of it. Am I clear in the differentiation?
I'm not
Okay.
providing connectivity service. I'm
Right.
basically, as you rightly point out, today if you have to go and buy like solar winds or any of those things for network monitoring, you don't have to do any of that stuff. So that's normally those things are actually done for data centers because the cost is $100,000 plus annually. But when you're talking about branch offices, enterprises, they don't have any of that stuff. So we are providing it, all of that stuff for a very small fee, monthly subscription basis. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that what kind of microservices are we talking about? It's not just about north-south bandwidth that we are talking about, it's also about east-west traffic. That means what is happening within your network. And also be able to provide them with all the micro-segmentation capabilities. That means what kind of things are really happening on your network, whether you have YouTube or Netflix or some of those things. And those are the kinds of other things that are going to be happening. Then you can actually set bandwidth prioritization and bandwidth throttling based on what kind of things that you want to do. Then we have security policies. I can actually apply policies straight onto the port. Like for example, I want to block all Facebook traffic on ports that are coming from engineering, for example, or Netflix traffic from all the engineering ports, whatever it is. We can apply all of that stuff. And the switches never reboot, and the next packet that comes in gets in. So whether you are here or whether you have a global deployment, everything happens within a matter of seconds. So and you can have individual configurations for even if you have 5,000 locations all around the world.
So it's network monitoring, not application monitoring.
Correct.
Right?
We are talking about networks, and yeah, absolutely correct.
Oh, okay. So how do you deal with, like, there are already these players in the enterprise market, right? So how do you deal with the management solutions, identity solutions, like even database companies are entering that? How do you deal with them? Like I saw VMware there. It makes sense for you to be integrated as part of their management system because they do have the centralized management system. Maybe Oracle do have. So I see that as a play, but I think it will be challenging to kind of introduce you as a parallel management system for networking because most of the data centers, they do have a lot of it already and they're struggling to kind of even get rid of some of them.
Correct.
Makes
So
sense?
I am absolutely. So that is why this is targeted towards enterprises, branch offices, and campus networks. So when you're talking about branch offices, say for example Target, okay, so you have 5,000 stores or 2,000 stores or whatever it is. Imagine going to each and every store and putting all of these network monitoring systems so that you can understand what the heck is happening inside the network. The closest that they have actually come to all the retail segments, especially Gap has been the leader, is that they have put an SD-WAN between the enterprise and the enterprise data center and the branch. Okay, that's how much they have come to. But up until now, we have all been seeing a network topology paradigm wherein everything in the branch goes through the corporate data center and then goes to the internet. Okay, so that is why you had the MPLS links and everything. But now the model has been a little bit different. Internet is actually the hub. Everybody is a spoke. So that means tunnels are created. Whatever traffic that I need to go over let us say all of your point of sale traffic that you want to go through the corporate data center, if only that tunnel from the branch is actually going to the enterprise data center. But anything that is, say for example, if you have provided just Wi-Fi so that the customers who come in, they have access to it, it's going through standard normal broadband. So that's a totally different tunnel. So the way that the networks have been done is completely different. But you don't want that to interfere with all of the other things. So you have the voice VLANs because you have all the voice over IP phones too, okay? And you have video services and so on and so forth for various customer interaction or demos and so on and so forth. Now, they are all in different segments, they all have different bandwidth, and that is where we come in with not only just micro-segmentation, but we're also providing dynamic VLAN, depending upon what kind of a device that you plug into the network and that kind of stuff. We have the ability to detect what kind of devices and appropriately throw them into the appropriate VLAN without having to do any kind of programming. And that's very critical. And also all of these devices, when they come in, they set they expose their own, we have to apply some specific security policies because everybody comes up with their own connotation of what a security attack could be. Because if I'm talking about a voice or IP, I'm talking about some specific attacks that I have to check for. If I'm talking about just a BYOD device, a laptop or a phone or whatever it is, I have to look for certain different things and so on and so forth. So depending upon that, all the dynamic feedback loop and the control tool, that is what we are going to be providing as microservices. And there is also another interesting thing that is happening, right? Up until now, there has always been a challenge for the network operator to provide all the data to the security team, to the application team, to everybody, to actually make these decisions. But we have made all of those things possible because now we have put it in a standard format that they can actually access, and we have made all of those things available to them. That's I think is the most interesting part of this.
Okay, one more question? Is there any other questions? I think we're about out of time. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so a few of you picked up idea roulette cards. Did anybody have any ideas or projects they wanted to present? Anybody? Well, we could just get right to the prizes then. We can go right to the prizes. So, I'm going to start out with the Eventbrite drawing. Because sometimes I have to go through a few names, so. Okay, and I will apologize now if I say your name wrong. Last name is Ravi Kumar. Shilpa, is that you? Well, congratulations. You just, because you registered on the Eventbrite site, you win this Kindle Fire.
Is anybody taking a picture?
Here.
It's a big moment. I mean, yeah, congratulations, Shilpa. So awesome. Yeah, safety was, yeah.
There you go, Sujata.
See? Yeah, this is her first big, huge, fancy prize. And yeah, you want to touch it?
And it's probably a first that we drew the person's name that was here on the first try, so. Okay, we have a few more gifts we want to give away. It's Ardy here. A-R-D-Y. Okay. We have these names in order, so. Ashish Varma? No, okay. How about Arun, and I'm going to say that name wrong too, Shriraman? S-R-I-R-A-M-A-N? Shriraman. Tell him he should have stayed. Go back. Okay, so. Okay, I've got these in order here, so let me go back here. Okay. Priscilla Chin. Oh, yay. You just won one of our handy new water bottles. I'm going to take it out of the box. It's a really nice. And here, I'll give you the bottle back too. I just maybe take a picture.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Picture.
Your name is everything.
Okay, is Peter Mullen here still? How about Madhu Kashyap? How about C. Lee? There you go. Oh, this is a It's gonna be hard to take a picture with this one. This is one of those tracker, you know, you put it in something.
Oh, that's a wearable thing?
It's, I don't know, my daughter uses one in her suitcase to tell her suitcase ends up when she travels.
Or like something like a tie?
Yeah, it's one of those kinds of things.
So you didn't know.
Okay.
Like kind of a treasure.
How about Ravi Nittur? Nittur, N-I-T-T-U-R, Ravi? How about Bill Bruns? I know he was here. Okay. Go back. How about Herman Segovia? Well, you guys need to stick around. How about Jim DeLeon? This is a cool little charger instead of, you know, L2 and go in the park and go on the wall. It's great to travel. Picture. Okay, last one we're going to call here. How about Kevin High? Oh, you're still here. Awesome. Kevin, I have. What this is. Oh, it's a box. You can have this box or a water bottle. This is actually a hub thing. It's a smart hub. I think it tells you the time and the temperature and that kind of stuff. So, again, a small picture. Here, you can. Okay.
Yay.
Okay. So, do you want to do some closing words? Our next meetup is February 21st. Oh, we absolutely do, and those are in the back of the room. I'll hand you the. Here, I'll hand you that. Right back. No.
Yeah, Robert, please.
Edit the recording. That's what I thought. Rep would also went backstage and he wanted to check the recording. Oh, yeah.
I thought you left. You should have been here.
And did they use the right Adobe software like somebody was talking about?
You see the footage first. We'll look the best.
Oops.
Why must be like shivering the picture? That was so
Where's
cool.
Shivaram?
Thank you so much, Kim.
Shiver. We have one more person for the picture.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can you take a picture for all of us? Yeah. Yeah, one for, the shorter one for Jeff.
Yeah, I gave it to him for that.
Oh, okay.
He took off already.
Thank you. And one with Shiva. Thank you so much. Yeah, actually, we can do the
Everybody.
everybody.
Group picture. We like to take group pictures.
Yeah, those
You may not want to try. Come on, come on, Ronnie.
He gives the
That's fine.
Yeah, go get it. Come on. There you go. Step side. There you go. Okay, everybody say cheese. Cheese. Let's do one more. All righty. Good job.
We should not forget our vendors, right? Jim? 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 And Jim.
Always, right?
Yeah. So these two actually hands-on. Yeah. Lakshmi? Yeah. So I got Windows on my PC. Oh, that's okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. What I really
Because it.
For yours, really, you don't. Yeah, my employees just started.